The room is quiet except for the soft shuffle of cards and the low hum of conversation. Chips click together in slow, rhythmic stacks, the faint scent of coffee mixing with the warmth of felt and focus. The game is Texas Hold'em, but tonight it's not about the thrill or the chase. It's about something quieter, learning to see the game through calm eyes. You take a deep breath and look down at your cards. Before you act, before you bet, there's a question waiting to be answered. A question that sits at the heart of every decision in poker. Is it worth it? If you enjoy learning the quiet side of the game, take a second to subscribe or leave a comment. It helps more players find their way to this table. What we do here isn't about hype or quick wins, it's about steady understanding. Poker is a conversation between logic and patience, and tonight's topic, pot odds, is one of the simplest, most useful ways to bring those two together. Most players hear the word math and tense up a little. They imagine complicated ratios, long equations, and calculators they'll never use at a table. But that's not what we're doing here. What you're about to learn is gentle math, the kind that fits in your head and feels natural once you understand it. It's the quiet arithmetic of opportunity, how much you can win compared to how much it costs to keep going. Pot odds tell you, in clear and simple terms, whether chasing that next card is a smart play or an expensive hope. You don't need to memorize formulas. You don't even need to be good at numbers. You just need to understand the rhythm of risk and reward. Think of it like reading the tide. The pot rises and falls with each bet, each call, each fold, and your chips, your little ships, move in and out with the current. Pot odds are how you tell whether the tide is carrying you toward profit or pulling you quietly out to sea. In every hand, you'll face moments of uncertainty. You'll look at the board and wonder, do I call? Do I fold? Pot odds are the compass that keeps you from drifting. They help you stay grounded in logic when emotion whispers otherwise. Instead of thinking, I feel lucky, you'll start thinking, my draw needs to hit 1 out of 3 times, and I'm getting better than 2 to 1. Suddenly the game starts to slow down. You see the structure beneath the surface. And with that clarity comes peace. The beauty of pot odds is that they don't demand perfection. They don't require memorizing dozens of rules. They ask only for awareness. Awareness of what's in the pot, what's being wagered, and what your chances really are. It's the same awareness that separates a calm, thoughtful player from one who chases losses out of frustration. Once you grasp this balance, the fear of making mistakes begins to fade. Every call, every fold, every decision feels deliberate. We'll take our time through this lesson. We'll start with the basics, what pot odds actually mean, and how they quietly shape every hand you play. Then we'll move through examples that show the difference between guessing and knowing. You'll see how small calculations lead to big savings, and how good folds can feel just as satisfying as good calls. Step by step, you'll learn to think in simple ratios, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, without needing to reach for a calculator. By the end of this session, you'll be able to glance at a pot, hear a bet size, and instinctively know what the right move is. You'll trust yourself more. You'll make decisions based not on fear but on flow, because in poker, math isn't about numbers, it's about truth. And once you can measure that truth clearly, you'll start to play with quiet confidence. So settle in. Let the chips rest in your hand. Breathe. You're not here to rush or win big tonight. You're here to understand something most players never do, that even in a game built on chance, peace of mind comes from simple, steady logic. And that's what pot odds truly offer. Not perfection, but peace. At its core, poker is a game of decisions made under uncertainty. You never have all the information, but you always have a choice. Pot odds are the tool that help you make those choices with logic instead of emotion. They tell you when the numbers are in your favor and when they're not. A quiet, reliable signal beneath all the noise of the game. Let's start simple. Pot odds measure the relationship between the size of the pot and the cost of a call. In plain terms, they answer this. Is the potential reward worth the price of admission? Imagine you're at the river, the pot is $100, and your opponent bets $50. To stay in, you have to call $50 to win a total pot of $150. You're risking 50 to win 150. That's 3 to 1. If you think you'll win more than 1 time in 4, it's a good call. If you think you'll win less, you fold. That's all pot odds are. Nothing fancy, nothing scary, just a clear way to measure risk and reward. The first key to understanding pot odds is this. Poker is a game of incomplete information. But perfect math, the math never changes. Your hand's odds of improving, your opponent's bet size, the size of the pot, those are facts. Emotion, fear and hope can distort your perception, but they can't change the math. That's why learning pot odds gives you control. It lets you separate what feels right from what is right. The second key principle is that pot odds don't exist in isolation. They're part of a bigger decision-making process that includes your outs, the cards that can improve your hand. Pot odds tell you what you're getting in return for calling. Your outs tell you how likely it is that you'll get there. Together, they create the foundation for smart, consistent play. The logic is simple. If the chance of hitting your hand is better than the price you're paying, you call. If not, you fold. Let's look at an easy example. You're holding 2 hearts, and there are 2 hearts on the board. One more heart gives you a flush. There are 13 hearts in the deck, and you can see 4 of them. Your 2 and the 2 on the board. That means 9 remain unseen. Out of 47 possible unseen cards, 52 total minus the 5 you know, 9 will make your hand. 9 divided by 47 is about a 19% chance to hit on the next card, roughly 1 in 5. If your opponent bets in a way that gives you better than 4 to 1 on a call, the math says go ahead. Anything worse, and you should fold unless there's another factor in play. This is where many players get lost. They overcomplicate the math. They think they need exact percentages or memorized tables. You don't. What you really need is a feel for ratios. 2 to 1 means you need to win 1 in 3 times, 3 to 1 means 1 in 4, 4 to 1 means 1 in 5. That's it. These round numbers are close enough to guide almost every real situation you'll face. The trick is to train your eye to see them automatically. Every time you play, start asking yourself small questions. How much is in the pot? How much do I have to call? Then compare those 2 numbers. Over time, your brain begins to build intuition. You'll stop thinking about the formula and start feeling the fairness of the deal. The goal isn't to become a human calculator, it's to build calm, reliable judgment. Now, let's talk about common mistakes. The first is ignoring the pot entirely. Beginners often focus only on their own cards. They think, I might hit my draw, so I'll call. But that thinking ignores the price you're paying. You might be chasing a small chance for a big cost, a losing trade in the long run. The second mistake is chasing hope instead of value. You might feel emotionally attached to a hand like a straight or flush draw because it looks close. But without proper pot odds, close can still be very far away. Another common trap is confusing pot odds with implied odds, the idea that you'll win more money later if you hit your hand. Implied odds are real, but they rely on guesswork. Pot odds are solid. They are what you know right now. The best players always start with what's certain, so the math in front of them, before factoring in what might happen next. Once you get that order right, your entire decision-making process becomes steadier. One more misconception, that pot odds are only useful for calling decisions. In truth, understanding pot odds helps you bet better too. If you know what price your opponent is getting, you can control whether they're making good or bad calls. Betting too small can give them perfect odds to chase. Betting larger forces mistakes. In that sense, pot odds are the invisible framework behind all bet sizing. They're not just defensive, they're strategic. Let's revisit our earlier example to make this more concrete. The pot is $100, your opponent bets $50, and you hold a flush draw. The pot is now $150, and it costs you $50 to call. That's 3 to 1. Your draw will complete about 1 time in 5 on the next card, which means you need 4 to 1 to break even. You're not getting that, so the math says fold. But if you expect your opponent to pay off another bet when you hit, your implied odds improve. Maybe then, and only then, the call becomes reasonable. The important thing is you know why you're calling, and not just that you want to. The core takeaway is this. Pot odds are the bridge between feeling and thinking. They let you slow the game down, remove guesswork, and make calm, logical choices. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be aware. Each time you pause to compare cost and reward, you strengthen the muscle that separates winning players from emotional ones. When you start to see pot odds clearly, poker changes. You stop feeling like the cards control you. Instead, you start to feel the structure beneath every hand a quiet framework of fairness that rewards patience, logic, and discipline. The more you respect that structure, the more the game respects you back. Every hand in poker tells a story. It begins with position and patience, unfolds through the betting rounds, and ends with a choice. Pot odds play a quiet role in each chapter of that story. They help you decide when to continue, when to let go, and when the price simply isn't right. Let's start before the flop. Imagine you're on the button with suited connectors, say 9 and 10 of hearts. A player in middle position raises 3 times the big blind, and one caller comes along. You're getting a good price to see a flop, because the pot is already growing. The question is whether your hand has enough potential to justify the call. You look at the numbers, you'll have to call 3 big blinds to compete for a pot of about 8 or 9. That's roughly 3 to 1. You're not expecting to win most of the time with 10 high, but you don't have to. When you hit a strong hand, so a straight, a flush, or a disguised 2-pair, you can win a big pot. The pot odds say the call is reasonable. You're investing a small amount for a chance at a large return. Now the flop comes down. Ace of hearts, 7 of hearts, and a 2 of clubs. You've flopped a flush draw. The player who raised continues with a half-pot bet. The pot is now 9 big blinds, and they bet 4.5. It costs you 4.5 to win 13.5, almost exactly 3 to 1. You know from experience that a flush draw will complete about 1 time in 5 on the next card. That's 4 to 1 odds. The math says the call is slightly unfavourable, but you also know there's still another street to come, and if you hit, you could win much more. That's where calm reasoning replaces emotion. You don't think about luck or hunches, you think about value. You remind yourself that calling here isn't just about the immediate odds, it's about potential future gain. If you expect to be paid off when you hit, your implied odds may make up the difference. That quiet understanding helps you stay composed. You call not because you hope to hit, but because you've thought it through. The turn comes, the king of spades. You miss your flush and your opponent bets again, this time a bit smaller, maybe 1/3 of the pot. Now the pot is larger and your price is better. You calculate quickly. You're calling 6 big blinds to win about 24, that's 4 to 1. Suddenly, the math is fair. You know you'll hit roughly 1 time in 5, and you're being offered exactly that. It's a neutral spot, no emotion, just even math. You call again, and the river brings the 4 of hearts. You're flush. You've arrived. Your opponent checks, and you bet for value. The hand plays out just as planned, built on quiet logical choices rather than spur-of-the-moment guesses. That's how pot odds guide a hand. They let you move through each street with awareness instead of anxiety. Let's look at another situation. You're holding top pair on a dangerous board, maybe king and queen with 2 suited cards showing. The pot is modest, but your opponent shoves all in. This is where many beginners panic. They feel pressure. They think, what if they're bluffing? But this is exactly when pot odds bring clarity. You take a breath and do the math. The pot is $200 and the shove is $100 more. That means you're getting 2 to 1. You only need to win 1 time in 3 to make the call profitable. Then you think about ranges. Would this opponent shove with a flush draw? Would they push with a weaker king? Or is it always 2-pair or better? The numbers frame the question, but your judgment fills in the rest. Pot odds don't make the decision for you. They illuminate it. Street by street, pot odds act as checkpoints. Before you commit chips, they remind you to ask, what's the price? What's my chance? The better you get at that rhythm, the calmer your game becomes. You stop making emotional calls because it feels right. You make them because they are right. On the flop, the math is most straightforward. You often have a draw, a flush, straight, or combination draw, and you can count your outs. Multiply those outs by about 2% per card remaining to estimate your chance to hit on the next street. That means 9 outs for a flush draw equals roughly 18%. If the bet you're facing gives you a higher return than that percentage, it's a call. If not, fold, no drama, just logic. On the turn, things slow down. The pot is larger, the bet's heavier, and the decision's more expensive. This is where calm players separate themselves from impulsive ones. Every bet must be weighed carefully, because the cost-to-reward ratio shifts. Pot odds become more meaningful with each chip added to the middle. If the math stops making sense, you stop chasing. Folding becomes an act of wisdom, not weakness. By the river, pot odds take on a different form. Now, it's not about drawing, it's about evaluating your final hand. The odds tell you how often your opponent needs to be bluffing for a call to be profitable. For example, if the pot is $100 and they bet $50, you need to win at least one time in 3 to break even. That's 33%. If you think they're bluffing more often than that, call. If not, fold and move on. The beauty of this logic is that it works whether you're holding a flush or just ace high. Here's a smaller but equally powerful insight. When you know your pot odds, you can design your bets to manipulate your opponent's decisions. If you want them to make a bad call, give them the wrong price. Bet large enough that the numbers work against them. If you want a call, make it tempting. Offer them a misleadingly good price. Pot odds aren't just for defense. They're a language of control. The hand you just imagined, from pre-flop to river, reflects the rhythm of poker. You don't calculate pot odds out loud or write them down, you feel them. You look at the pot, estimate the ratio, and make your choice with quiet confidence. Over time, this rhythm becomes automatic. The math fades and the awareness remains. When you reach that point, poker slows down in the best way. The noise fades. The chaos softens. Each bet becomes a small logical decision in a bigger story. You no longer ask, "Am I lucky?" You ask, "Is the price right?" And that shift from emotion to logic changes everything about how you play. The goal isn't to turn poker into math class, it's to use simple reasoning to protect yourself from costly mistakes. Pot odds aren't about memorization, they're about mindfulness. They remind you to stay present, think clearly, and trust the numbers more than your nerves. The more you use them, the more natural they feel. Eventually you'll glance at the pot and just know whether a call makes sense. That's when you'll realize that the real power of pot odds isn't in the math itself, it's in the calm they create. Every strong poker player starts with a plan, not just for one hand, but for every position at the table. Pot odds are the quiet foundation of that plan, a guide that keeps your choices logical, consistent, and balanced. Before the flop, most players think only about their cards, but a real plan begins with position, stack size, and the rhythm of the table. These things determine which hands are worth investing in and which are better left folded. Pot odds play a small but vital role in that judgment. They tell you whether entering the pot makes sense for the price you're paying. Think of it this way. Every time you face a raise, you're being offered a price to see a flop. If you have to call $3 to play for a pot of $9, that's 3 to 1. Your hand doesn't need to be a favourite, it just needs to win often enough to justify the investment. Weak players guess. Strong players know their odds before they commit. This doesn't mean you need to calculate every situation down to decimals. You just need rough awareness. If you're getting 3 to 1, and your hand will only connect 1 in 6 times, you fold. If you're getting 5 to 1 and you'll connect 1 in 4, you call. Is a ratio thinking, not number crunching. Over time, it becomes instinct. Building a starting hand plan means thinking ahead about which situations offer natural value. For example, suited connectors, small pairs, or suited aces all rely on hitting hidden strength. They need good pot odds to make sense. You don't play them to win small pots. You play them because when they hit, they can win big ones. When you're getting a fair price pre-flop, these hands become part of your toolkit. But when the price isn't right, when the pot is small and the raise is large, discipline saves you. Folding early avoids difficult decisions later. Many beginners fall into the trap of calling just to see a flop. They forget that every chip you save is as valuable as every chip you win. Pot odds help protect you from that impatience. Let's say you're in the small blind. The pot is $6 after a raise and 2 calls. You need to put in $2 more to play. That's 3 to 1. It might seem tempting, but remember, you'll be out of position the rest of the hand. Your price is good, but your visibility is poor. This is where range balance comes in, knowing which hands are strong enough to overcome positional weakness. Pot odds give you the math, but awareness gives you the wisdom. Good players think about their range like a balanced diet. Too many weak hands and you become predictable. Too many strong hands and you miss profitable spots. Pot odds act like portion control. They tell you how much risk to take in each position and when to wait for a better opportunity. Now, let's connect this idea to bet sizing. If you raise pre-flop and someone calls, their pot odds shape their decision. If you want to make it difficult for weak hands to continue, raise larger. If you want to invite loose action, raise smaller. Understanding pot odds from both sides of the table lets you control the flow of the game. You'll also notice how pot odds influence stack management. When you play deep stacked, small calls are less costly, and implied odds matter more. When stacks are shallow, the math tightens. There's less room to maneuver, and pot odds become exacting. In short stack play, even a small mistake in pricing can cost your whole tournament life. Here's a simple framework you can carry into every session. Before each decision, pause and ask, what am I risking and what am I trying to win? Then ask, how often will this hand hit? If the answers align, make the call. If they don't, fold with confidence. That pause, that quiet, conscious breath, is what separates thoughtful players from reckless ones. Over time, this structure builds calm. You'll notice that you're not reacting to the game anymore. You're guiding it. You'll call less often just to see one more card. You'll bet sizes that make sense for both protection and value. And most importantly, you'll feel in control no matter how wild the table becomes. Remember, poker is not about perfection. It's about avoiding costly errors while capitalizing on clear advantages. Pot odds are your tool for spotting those advantages early. They give shape to your strategy before emotion can interfere. When you blend pot odds with a balanced starting hand plan, your entire game steadies. You stop asking, is this hand good? And start asking, is this hand worth the price? That one shift makes every future decision easier. The next time you sit down to play, try this. Before you even see your cards, glance around the table. Think about position. Think about stack sizes. Then remind yourself that every chip you play has a cost and a potential return. When the action reaches you, those small reminders will guide your judgment naturally. A structured starting plan doesn't make poker predictable. It makes it peaceful. You'll know where you stand, when to engage, and when to let go. The math won't feel mechanical anymore. It will feel like rhythm, a quiet, steady pulse beneath your decisions. That's what pot odds are meant to teach. Not numbers for numbers' sake, but balance. Balance between logic and patience. Between curiosity and control. Between chasing every opportunity and choosing only the right ones. When you build your plan around that balance, every hand begins with calm purpose, not chance. Tournament poker feels different from cash games. Every chip you lose has more weight, and every decision carries the pressure of survival. Pot odds still apply, but they blend with a new layer of logic, stack depth, blind levels, and the shifting value of each chip as the game progresses. In cash games, chips are money. In tournaments, chips are life. That distinction changes how you think about odds. A call that might be mathematically correct in a cash game could be a disaster in a tournament simply because it risks elimination. Pot odds remain the same in theory, but the meaning behind them evolves. At the start of a tournament, stacks are deep. You have room to breathe. This is when pot odds can work most purely. You can afford to chase a draw or call with speculative hands when the price is right. If you hit, the reward can be huge. Deep stacks mean more implied odds. The extra money you stand to win later. Early on, the math favours patience and creativity. But as blinds rise, the pressure builds. Now your pot odds interact with your stack size in a new way. Suppose you're down to 20 big blinds and face a small raise. The pot is offering you a tempting price, but calling would commit a large portion of your remaining chips. Even if the pot odds look good on paper, the tournament odds might not. You have to think beyond the numbers, about survival, position, and timing. This is where many beginners struggle. They understand pot odds, but not the context. A flush draw with great odds feels the same as it did earlier in the day. But when your stack is small, missing that draw could end your run. Pot odds tell you when a call is profitable in the long run, but tournament life is one long run condensed into a few hours. You have to weigh both the math and the moment. Imagine you're in the middle stages with an average stack. You open with pocket eights and the big blind calls. The flop comes queen high, 2 spades. Your opponent leads out with a half pot bet. The pot is 10,000 and they bet 5,000. It's 3-1. You might think that's a fair price to call, but what's really at stake? If you're wrong, you'll lose 1/3 of your chips, a dangerous spot when blinds are increasing. Pot odds help you measure the call, but tournament sense tells you to fold and wait for a better spot. Now picture the late stages, near the final table, where pay jumps matter. The same math applies, but pressure distorts perception. Players tighten up, fearing elimination. This creates opportunity. When others fold too often, your understanding of pot odds becomes a weapon. You can apply pressure with bets that give opponents bad prices to call. You're not just calculating your odds anymore, you're shaping theirs. Let's take an example. You're short stacked with 10 big blinds. The blinds and antes make the pot worth 3 big blinds before any action. You move all in with ace-10 suited. A player behind you is thinking about calling with a small pair. They're getting around 1.7 to 1, close to even money. But they also risk doubling you up and losing momentum. Your shove puts them in a tough position where the math and the moment conflict. That's what good tournament awareness does. It uses pot odds as leverage. As stacks grow shallow, pot odds simplify. The math becomes clean because there's no room for future streets. You're often deciding between folding and committing everything. Here, pot odds meet the ICM, the independent chip model, which measures the real-world value of your tournament life. Calling with slim odds might win chips, but lose equity. Folding might preserve fewer chips, but protect your position. It's no longer about being right mathematically, it's about being wise strategically. One way to stay grounded is to think in ratios of risk to reward instead of raw numbers. Ask, if I risk my tournament life here, what do I stand to gain? Sometimes the answer is simple. You're doubling up with strong odds. Other times, you're risking elimination for a tiny edge that doesn't justify the cost. Pot odds remind you to keep that ratio honest. In the middle stages, the best players combine math with timing. They know when to trust pot odds for value and when to pass on a marginal spot. For example, if the pot odds are slightly favourable but you sense the table dynamic shifting, it can be wiser to wait. That discipline, the ability to say not yet, is one of poker's quiet superpowers. You'll also find that understanding pot odds improves your bluffing instincts. When you bluff, you're trying to make your opponent fold hands that are mathematically justified to continue. If you can size your bets to give them the wrong price, you make their decision harder. Bet too small and you invite calls. Bet the right size and you apply maximum pressure. In tournaments, that edge adds up quickly. Here's another layer. Bubble play. When only a few players remain before the money, the whole table tightens. Pot odds stay the same, but fear inflates their impact. If you're confident and disciplined, you can use that moment to steal blinds relentlessly. Your opponent's hesitation becomes your advantage. Their good pot odds are outweighed by bad timing, and you profit by staying logical while they let emotion lead. As the tournament narrows to its end, every decision carries amplified weight. Pot odds are no longer about survival alone. They're about maximizing opportunity. You'll make precise calls, thin folds, and well-timed bluffs. You'll rely less on luck and more on logic. The numbers won't guarantee victory, but they'll keep you centered. Remember this, tournament poker is not about avoiding risk. It's about choosing smart risk. Pot odds don't eliminate uncertainty, they illuminate it. They give you the ability to see through pressure and make choices rooted in reason, not fear. When you reach that level of awareness, you stop feeling rushed. You breathe between each hand. You think clearly, even when the stakes are high. You recognize that patience, not aggression, wins the long game. And through it all, pot odds remain your quiet ally, a constant measure of fairness in an unpredictable world. Poker doesn't just test your logic. It tests your patience, your nerves, and your ability to stay centered when everything feels uncertain. Pot odds are built on math, but applying them requires emotional control. Without that control, even the right numbers can lead to the wrong decisions. Every player knows the feeling. You lose a big hand and suddenly the next one feels heavier. You start reacting instead of thinking. The pot odds haven't changed, but your perspective has. That's the moment emotion becomes the enemy of logic. When you're tilted, numbers lose meaning. You see a bet and think, I deserve to win this one. You chase cards because it feels like balance, as if the game owes you something. But poker doesn't care about fairness in the short term. It rewards patience over time. Emotional discipline is what allows pot odds to work as intended. One of the most common emotional traps is revenge calling. You know the math says fold, but you call anyway because you want to catch your opponent bluffing. It's pride disguised as logic. When that happens, pause and breathe. Remind yourself that poker is a game of thousands of decisions, and one calm fold now is worth more than one emotional call that costs your stack. The best way to regain control is to shift focus from the outcome to the process. Don't judge your play by whether you won or lost a hand. Judge it by whether your decision was grounded in logic. If the pot odds were wrong and you folded, that's a win, even if your draw would have hit. Over time, this mindset builds confidence that isn't shaken by short-term variance. Let's look at a simple example. You call with a flush draw and miss. The pot was offering 3-1 and your odds were 4-1. The fold would have been correct, but you called anyway because you didn't want to feel left out. That's an emotional call. If you make that decision once, it's fine. If you make it often, it's ruinous. Emotional control is what turns occasional mistakes into learning instead of patterns. To build that control, create a ritual between hands. Stack your chips, take a sip of water, breathe slowly. Give your mind a small reset before each decision. The quiet between hands is where good poker happens. It's where you return to logic and remember, every bet is a choice, not a reaction. Fear can distort reasoning just as much as frustration. Sometimes you know the math supports a call, but you fold because you're afraid to lose. That's the other side of emotional imbalance, defensive play. You protect your chips so tightly that you miss opportunities. Balanced poker means neither chasing losses nor avoiding risk entirely. It means trusting the math enough to make uncomfortable but correct decisions. You'll notice that emotional spikes often come when the game speeds up. When pots get large or multiple players shove at once, that's when the heartbeat quickens and the brain starts to race. The secret is to slow everything down internally. Take a mental step back. Ask the same question you always do. What am I risking and what am I trying to win? That single pause restores clarity. It also helps to keep perspective on variance. Even the best decisions lose sometimes. That is not failure, that's probability playing out. Pot odds are about long-term truth, not short-term luck. When you remember that, bad beats lose their sting. You realize you're not trying to win this hand. You're trying to make the right play in 100 similar spots. That shift changes your entire relationship with the game. Emotional control also deepens your ability to read others. When you're calm, you notice small things, the rhythm of betting, the pace of speech, the stillness of the room. You're not clouded by frustration or excitement. You're observing. That awareness becomes an edge far beyond numbers. It lets you apply logic and intuition together without mixing them up. There's a quiet satisfaction that comes from folding correctly while tilted. You feel a small private victory, not against your opponent, but against yourself. Every time you resist the urge to chase, you strengthen the part of you that wins long term. Poker rewards that self-control more than any clever trick or flashy bluff. Let's imagine a hand where this matters. You've lost 2 pots in a row, you're dealt suited connectors and face a raise. The pot odds are fair, but you know your emotions aren't. You're irritated, impatient, and ready to make something happen. Instead, you fold, you take a deep breath, you let the hand go. Moments later, the flop would have given you a draw, and someone else wins a big pot. That moment hurts for a second, but deep down, you know it was right. That's emotional mastery of calm logic under pressure. If poker were only about math, computers would win every game. What makes humans powerful players is our ability to combine logic with patience, instinct with discipline. Pot odds are the logical side of that balance. Emotional control is what allows logic to work when the stakes rise and your pulse quickens. You can practice this skill even away from the table. When you feel frustration in daily life, waiting in traffic, standing in line, or handling something unexpected, only use it as a small test. Breathe, assess, and respond with patience. The mindset you build in those moments transfers directly to poker. Calm is a habit, not an accident. Eventually, emotional control becomes your quiet armor. You stop reacting to wins and losses as if they define you. You view each hand as a puzzle to solve, not a personal challenge to win. The result is a more grounded, more enjoyable game. You play better, but you also feel better while playing. Pot odds give you structure. Emotional control gives you stability. Together, they form the twin pillars of calm, long-term success. When you can trust both, the math in your mind and the patience in your heart, poker stops feeling like chaos. It becomes a series of choices made in peace. Once you're comfortable with the basics of pot odds, something interesting happens. The math starts to fade into the background. You stop counting ratios in your head and start feeling the balance of risk and reward instinctively. This is where deeper understanding begins, when logic becomes rhythm. At this level, pot odds are no longer just a tool for calling or folding. They become part of your overall decision-making flow, how you size bets, how you read ranges, and how you balance aggression with caution. The difference between a good player and a great one isn't who knows the math. It's who can feel when to trust it and when to adapt. Let's talk about adjustment. Textbook odds assume a neutral world, one where opponents play predictably, and every bet reflects real strength. But poker is a human game. Players bluff, slow play, and react emotionally. Deeper insight means using pot odds as a foundation, then layering human behavior on top. For example, imagine you face a half-pot bet on the river. The pot is $100, and your opponent bets $50. The math says you need to win one time in 3 to break even. But you notice something. They've made this exact bet size several times before, always with marginal hands. Now the equation shifts. You're still getting the same price, but the probability of them bluffing rises. The math hasn't changed, but the meaning has. Good players use pot odds as anchors, not chains. They know the numbers, but don't obey them blindly. When the math and the moment disagree, awareness takes the lead. If the numbers say fold, but your experience says the opponent is over bluffing, you call. If the odds say call, but the body language screams strength, you trust that instead. The math gives you structure. Intuition adds context. Another layer of deeper insight comes from understanding combos, combinations of hands your opponent could have. This is the logical bridge between pot odds and hand reading. You estimate how many strong hands and weak hands fit their actions. If there are far more bluffs in that range than value hands, your call becomes mathematically justified, even if the pot odds are marginal. It's not guessing, it's reasoning based on proportion. Consider this example. You're on the river facing a large bet. The pot is $200 and the bet is $150. You're being offered 1.3 to 1, which means you need to win about 43% of the time. You think about their range. There are 6 value hands that beat you, and maybe 10 bluff combinations that miss draws. 10 out of 16 total hands means they're bluffing over 60% of the time. The call is correct, even though the raw math looks tight. That's deeper understanding, connecting ratios with human tendencies. Pot odds also guide your own bet sizing. When you bet, you're controlling the odds your opponent gets. If you want them to make mistakes, you set the price wrong for their draw. Let's say there's $100 in the pot and your opponent likely has a flush draw. If you bet $25, you're giving them 5 to 1. Great odds to call. But if you bet $75, you cut it down to 1.3 to 1. Now their call becomes a long-term losing play. You've used pot odds not just to protect yourself, but to shape their behavior. This is what professionals do quietly at every level of play. They're not calculating in the moment. They're designing the math before the decision happens. Every bet size is intentional, meant to invite or discourage specific actions. Pot odds aren't just reactive, they're creative. They let you steer the rhythm of the game. As you advance, you'll also learn about reverse implied odds, the danger of hitting your hand but still losing a big pot. This happens when your draw is strong but not invincible. For example, chasing a low flush when higher suits are possible. Pot odds might say call, but deeper reasoning reminds you that winning doesn't always mean profit. Sometimes folding now prevents a bigger loss later. Another refinement is recognizing when the board texture changes the meaning of odds. Dry boards, disconnected cards with few draws, make bet sizes more honest. Wet boards, coordinated and draw-heavy, inflate the pot and the decisions. The more potential draws out there, the more critical it becomes to price them correctly. This is where precision matters most. Your awareness of pot odds keeps the chaos manageable. There's also the psychological layer. Strong players use pot odds as part of their table image. When they call in spots that look mathematically thin, opponents assume they're fearless. When they fold quickly to bad prices, they appear disciplined. Both impressions shape future hands. Mastering pot odds doesn't just improve your math, it builds your reputation as someone in control. Over time, you'll develop something like emotional muscle memory. You'll glance at a pot and just know when the ratio feels off. You won't need to count, you'll sense it. That intuition comes from experience, not guesswork. It's built on thousands of small calculations that trained your awareness quietly over time. And here's the key insight that surprises most players. Pot odds aren't meant to make you robotic. They're meant to free your mind from guesswork so your creativity can take over. Once you trust the structure, you can improvise confidently. You can read situations faster, bet more intuitively, and focus on people instead of numbers. In the long run, this balance between math and awareness is what defines mastery. You don't chase perfect accuracy, you chase consistency. You won't always make the optimal play, but you'll avoid the catastrophic ones. That's how professional players survive the ups and downs of thousands of hands. Think of pot odds as your compass. The needle points toward truth, but it doesn't tell you the terrain. You still have to read the landscape, the players, the mood, the timing. Deeper insight is learning to use both. When you trust the math and read the moment, you stop being reactive and start being strategic. That's the quiet transformation every serious player goes through. You begin with numbers on a page. Then one day, those numbers turn into instincts you can feel. You no longer calculate. You understand, and in that understanding, poker becomes calm again. Let's use a quick example. It's late at night in a small card room. The lights are soft, the felt is worn smooth, and the air carries the quiet tension of tired concentration. Only 4 players remain at the table, their chip stacks uneven, but their focus steady. You've been here for hours, not chasing, not forcing, just waiting for the right moment. You glance down and see 10 of spades and 9 of spades, modest cards but familiar ones. You've played them before. You call from the button, watching the blinds follow along. The dealer burns a card and spreads the flop. Jack of spades, 7 of hearts, 2 of clubs. You have an open-ended straight draw and a backdoor flush. Nothing made yet, but promise all around. The small blind checks. The big blind bets half the pot. Calm, deliberate, routine. You take a moment to breathe. The pot is 12,000 and he bets 6,000. It will cost you 6,000 to win 18,000 total. 3-1. Your draw will hit one time in about 5. The math isn't perfect, but close. You glance at him. His eyes fixed on the board. Not on you. You sense steadiness, but not confidence. You call, and the turn brings the 4 of spades. Now things get interesting. You have a straight draw and a flush draw and a 15 outs in total. The small blind folds. The big blind bets again, this time 9,000 into a pot of 24,000. You take another breath, letting the rhythm of the chips calm your mind. It's 9,000 to win 33,000, a little better than 3.5-1. With 15 outs, you'll hit 1 in about 3. The math says go. You trust it. You slide in the chips with a quiet clack. The dealer burned and turns the river. The queen of spades. You've made your flush. The other player checks quickly, almost too quickly. That timing tells you everything. You bet small, 12,000, an amount he can't resist. He calls and turns over 2 pair. You show your flush. The dealer pushes the pot toward you. You gather the chips slowly, not out of pride, but out of peace. The entire hand played out exactly as it should have, not because you were lucky, though luck helped, but because you followed the rhythm of logic. You didn't guess, you didn't chase. You read the price, made the call, and trusted the math. That's what a calm game feels like. No rush of adrenaline, no sting of fear, just quiet clarity. You realise that pot odds aren't just about numbers, they're about the pace of your thinking. Every time you stop to measure risk and reward, you slow the game down to your speed. You turn chaos into sequence. Later, as you sit with your coffee and count your chips, you think back to one small decision, that first call on the flop. You didn't know what would happen, you just knew the price were fair. That's the heart of good poker. You can't control the cards, but you can control whether each choice is built on reason or reaction. The other players keep talking about the lucky spade. You just smile. Because you know it wasn't luck that mattered, it was composure. The quiet math beneath the noise, the ability to stay patient long enough for probability to do its work. You look around the table one last time, the felt, the cards, the slow exchange of chips, all reminders that the game rewards stillness as much as skill. You shuffle your cards gently, not because you're eager for the next hand, but because you understand something simple and rare. Every call, every fold, every chip you move has meaning when it's guided by calm logic. That's what pot odds truly teach. They're not a shortcut to winning. They're a way to build peace in the middle of uncertainty. A way to stay steady in a game that constantly tests your nerve. And as you stack the last of your chips and sip the final bit of coffee, you realise that what you've really learned tonight isn't math, it's patience. Every poker hand is a story of choices. Some are quiet and easy, others filled with tension. Pot odds stay the same in all of them, a constant thread of logic running through the noise. To see how they work in real time, let's walk through a few different hands, each showing a different angle of decision-making. Hand 1, the discipline of folding. You're sitting in middle position with ace of diamonds and 9 of clubs, a solid but unspectacular hand. The player to your right raises 3 times the big blind. 2 others call, you pause and do the math. There's 9 big blinds in the pot and it costs you 3 to call and 3 to 1. That sounds decent, but you're out of position against multiple players. You'll have to play cautiously post-flop, and ace-9 rarely hits big. The temptation is there to see a flop just in case. But this is where discipline comes in. Pot odds are only one part of the puzzle. Position, potential, and post-flop playability matter just as much. You fold, letting the pot go. Later, the board runs out ace-high with 2 players all in, one with ace-queen, one with ace-king. You would have been crushed. The fold saves you from trouble. That's pot odds combined with awareness. Logic steering you clear of hidden danger. Hand 2, the calm call. A few hands later, you pick up king of hearts and 10 of hearts on the button. There's a raise from the early position and 1 caller. The pot is already large. You calculate, calling costs 3,000 to play for a pot of nearly 9,000. That's 3 to 1. Your hand plays well with position. The math and situation agree. You call. The flop comes jack of hearts, 9 of clubs, 3 of spades. You've flopped an open-ended straight draw and 2 overcards. The original raiser bets half the pot. The call is 4,500 to win 13,500, about 3 to 1 again. Your draw will complete roughly 1 in 3 times by the river, giving you a fair price. You call, calmly, no rush. The turn is the 2 of hearts, adding a flush draw. Now you have 13 outs, 8 for the straight and 5 for the flush. Your opponent slows down and checks. You check behind, taking the free card. The river is the queen of diamonds. You've made the straight. He bets small, you raise modestly, and he folds. The entire hand was guided not by luck or impulse, but by ratio-based logic, always asking, what's the price, what's my chance? Hand 3, the traplet of hope. This time you hold pocket sixes in early position. You raise and 2 players call, the flop comes king, queen and 10, all high cards. You've missed entirely. But when everyone checks, you convince yourself to continue. On the turn, a small bet comes your way in just 1/3 of the pot. It feels cheap. You think, maybe I'll hit a 6, but that's emotion talking. The odds of spiking one of 2 remaining 6s are about 4%. You're getting 4 to 1 on the call. It seems borderline, but the truth is your implied odds are poor. Even if you hit, that board is dangerous. A straight or flush could already be there. You fold instead of hoping. The river brings a 6, the card you were dreaming of, but another player turns over ace-jack for a straight. You would have lost a big pot. This is where logic proves its worth. Pot odds weren't just math, they were protection. They saved you from a trap disguised as hope. Hand 4, the bluffing bet. Later in the session, you find a new way to use pot odds against your opponent. You're holding queen-jack of clubs. You raise from the cutoff and the big blind calls. The flop comes at 8 of clubs, 5 of hearts, 2 of diamonds. You miss completely, but your opponent checks. You decide to c-bet half the pot of 5,000 into 10,000. Here's the key. That size matters. You're offering your opponent 3 to 1 odds to call. If they have a small piece of the board, that price might tempt them. If you bet larger, say 8,000, the price worsens to a little over 2 to 1. Now it's less appealing for weak pairs or gut shots. You bet 8,000, forcing tough decisions. They fold. You win a small pot without a showdown. That's the strategic side of pot odds. How you can use them not just to react, but influence behaviour. Hand 5, the river decision. You're deep in a long session. The table has quieted down. You've built a solid stack, and now you're in a hand with ace of spades and 10 of spades. The flop brings ace of hearts, 10 of diamonds, and 4 of clubs. You flop top 2 pair, strong but vulnerable. The turn comes the king of hearts, and your opponent bets half the pot. You call watching. Carefully. The river is the queen of hearts, completing the obvious straight and flush draws. Your opponent bets again, so 30,000 into a pot of 60,000. It's 2 to 1. You only need to win 1 time in 3 to call. But as you replay the hand in your head, you realise every draw got there. He raised pre-flop, bet twice, and now fires again on a coordinated board. The math tempts you, but intuition reminds you. The price doesn't matter if the probability of winning is near zero. You fold, showing restraint. He shows the jack of hearts and tamiles. You made the right call, though, by not calling. Hand 6, the all-in math. In another game, you're short-stacked in a tournament. You have 12 big blinds left and the blinds are about to rise. You're in the big blind, holding pocket fives. The cutoff moves all in for 10 big blinds. The small blind folds. The pot now includes antes, small blind, big blind, and the shove, roughly 13.5 blinds total. It cost you 9 to call. You're getting about 1.5 to 1. You estimate the opponent's shoving range, broadways, small pairs, and ace-x hands. Against that range, your fives are around 48% to win. You only need 40% to break even. The call is correct. You move your chips in with confidence. The board runs out clean. You double up. Not from luck, but from clear thinking. The math was fair, the reasoning solid, the decision calm. Hand 7, the hero fold. In the final hand of the night, you're tired but composed. You hold king-queen offsuit. The flop is king-high with 2 hearts. You bet, your opponent calls. The turn brings a blank and the river completes the flush. Your opponent moves all in. The pot is offering you almost 2 to 1, tempting odds. But you know this player well. He never bluffs big on rivers. The math invites you, but the pattern warns you. You fold. He shows the ace of hearts, confirming your read. It's a quiet moment, no celebration, no regret. You feel a kind of peace that only comes from trusting both the numbers and yourself. That's what pot odds evolve into. Intuition grounded in truth. When you look at all these hands together, a pattern emerges. Pot odds don't guarantee wins. They guarantee clarity. They keep you from guessing, and they help you stay composed when uncertainty feels overwhelming. They turn poker into a process rather than a gamble. Some hands teach patience through folding. Others reward courage through calling. A few remind you that not every good decision pays off immediately. But when you follow logic over emotion, the long run takes care of itself. You win less often by chance and more often by structure. And the best part is how peaceful it becomes. You stop feeling like every hand is a test of luck or pride. You start treating each one as a quiet equation. What's in the pot, what it costs, and what your chances are. When you think that way, your emotions settle. The game slows down, the noise fades. All that's left is calm, clear reasoning. That's the hidden power of pot odds. Not just a ratio, but a rhythm. A way to see the game through still water instead of storm. Each hand, win or lose, becomes part of something bigger. A journey towards steady, thoughtful mastery. Every good player eventually learns that logic and instinct aren't enemies. They're partners. In poker, you need both. Logic keeps you grounded in math and reason. Instinct helps you interpret what logic can't. Timing, tone, and human behavior. The best decisions come when the two work together. When you first learn pot odds, everything feels mathematical. Ratios, percentages, break-even points. It's all structure. That's necessary at the beginning. You're building a foundation you can trust. But once you've practiced enough, those numbers stop feeling foreign. They become automatic, freeing your mind to notice the subtle things, body language, rhythm, and the pulse of the table. Instinct is what happens when experience becomes feeling. It's not guessing. It's the quiet voice that recognizes patterns your conscious mind has seen 100 times before. When you've watched enough hands, your brain starts to process information faster than you can explain it. That's instinct, built on logic. Let's say you're on the river facing a big bet. The pot odds tell you to call one time in 3, but something feels off. The bet size, the speed, the way your opponent looks at the felt instead of at you. The math says the call is fair, but your instinct whispers that it's not. You fold, the opponent shows the nuts. You were right, but not by chance. Your instinct was shaped by thousands of quiet calculations over time. The opposite can happen too. Sometimes instinct tells you a player is weak, and the math supports it. You're facing a small river bet in a large pot, and you're getting a great price. Your opponent's story doesn't add up, and the pot odds confirm it's worth the risk. You call, and they show a bluff. That's the harmony between logic and awareness, both sides speaking the same language. Problems arise when players confuse impulse with instinct. Impulse is emotional. It's that quick, desperate call made because you don't want to fold. Instinct, on the other hand, is calm. It feels steady, not frantic. You can tell the difference by how your body reacts. True instinct feels like understanding, impulse feels like tension. One comes from experience, the other from fear. Pot odds give instinct its boundaries. They stop you from overreaching. Even when you sense something, you still measure it against the math. You ask, does this feeling make sense in context? If it does, you follow it. If it doesn't, you trust the numbers. That small checkpoint keeps emotion from dressing up as intuition. Over time, this balance becomes natural. You don't have to choose between logic and instinct, you just move between them. The structure of pot odds keeps you from drifting too far toward emotion, while instinct keeps you flexible when situations aren't black and white. It's a quiet rhythm of thought that steadies you in the long game. This is what separates consistent players from volatile ones. The consistent ones rely on structure but stay open to feeling. They know the numbers cold, but they also read the room. The volatile ones either ignore math completely or cling to it too rigidly. They either guess or freeze. Balance lives in the middle, guided by ratios, refined by awareness. Poker rewards that balance in subtle ways. You find yourself folding with peace, calling without fear, and betting with quiet conviction. You're not calculating or guessing, or you're responding. The math and the moment align. That's what mastery feels like, thought without struggle. When logic and instinct finally merge, the game changes. You stop seeing poker as chaos and start seeing it as pattern. Every bet, every call, every fold carries meaning. Pot odds remain your anchor, but instinct becomes the current that carries you forward. Together, they form the calm flow that every player seeks, the point where thinking and feeling move as one. Poker isn't mastered in a week or a month, it's learned slowly, hand by hand, through repetition and awareness. Long-term discipline is what turns understanding into instinct. Pot odds are simple, but using them consistently over years is what makes them powerful. At first, it takes effort to stop and think through the math. You have to remind yourself to count the pot, compare the bet, and estimate your odds. It feels mechanical, but the discipline to keep doing that, even when you're tired or tilted, builds habits that never leave you. Each time you choose logic over emotion, you strengthen your foundation. Fold when the price is wrong. Call when the math supports it. Ignore the outcome. Over time, those small rational choices create a track record of calm play. You stop measuring success by pots won and start measuring it by decisions made correctly. The long run is where poker reveals its truth. In the short term, anyone can lose to bad luck. Cards don't care about fairness, but across hundreds or thousands of sessions, logic wins. The players who respect pot odds don't just protect their bankrolls, they protect their peace of mind. They know that one unlucky river doesn't erase a lifetime of good choices. Discipline also means keeping your emotions from dictating your volume of play. When you win big, the temptation is to keep going. When you lose, it's to chase. In both cases, emotion blurs judgment. The steady player stops, rests, and returns only when clear. Poker isn't a sprint, it's a quiet marathon of mental endurance. Your bankroll is the mirror of that discipline. Every buy-in, every limit, every session choice should reflect logic, not impulse. Pot odds apply here too, a risk versus reward on a broader scale. You decide how much to invest, how much to protect, and how much to let go. Those same ratios keep you safe far beyond the table. Study helps too. Reviewing hands after each session deepens understanding. When you find spots where you called without the right price, you don't judge, you learn. When you see how often correct folds save you chips, the math begins to feel like trust. That reflection turns discipline into wisdom. Over months and years, consistency becomes your real advantage. Many players know the math, but few have the patience to apply it hand after hand. They drift back toward guessing. You won't. You'll know that every time you resist the urge to gamble without reason, you're reinforcing a quiet kind of strength, one that compounds like interest. There will be stretches when the cards go cold. You'll fold more than you play. You'll wonder if patience still matters. That's the hardest test of all, the test of faith in the process. But if you keep honouring the math, you'll notice something. When your luck turns, your stack grows faster, because you never wasted chips chasing. Discipline preserves opportunity. Eventually your playstyle reflects your mindset. Other players may not understand how you stay calm through swings, but you'll know. You're not attached to outcomes, you're attached to truth, the small, consistent truths revealed through ratios and reason. That's what long-term discipline really means. It's not rigid control, it's quiet devotion to clarity. Pot odds become a daily practice, a mental anchor that keeps your emotion steady and your strategy honest. You play because you love the process, not because you crave the result. Years from now, when you look back, you won't remember the exact hands you folded or the pots you won. You'll remember how the game slowed down, how every decision became deliberate, how peace replaced chaos. That's the legacy of discipline, a mind that no longer fights itself. Every game of poker begins the same way. A shuffle, a deal, a quiet moment of possibility. But what separates one player from another isn't luck or even skill. It's how they think in that silence. The best players don't rush toward action, they rest in awareness. They see every decision as a small test of logic, patience, and balance. Pot odds are one of the purest reflections of that mindset. They don't care about emotion or ego. They don't bend under pressure. They simply measure fairness, how much you risk compared to how much you stand to gain. Understanding that fairness changes how you see the game. It changes how you see yourself. When you started learning this concept, it may have felt mechanical, dividing numbers, counting ratios, comparing percentages. But what you were really learning was rhythm, a way of slowing the game down until it moves at the pace of reason. Pot odds taught you that even in uncertainty there's structure. Even in chance there's logic waiting to be recognized. Over time that logic seeps into more than just poker. It becomes a way of thinking. You start applying it naturally. To the hands you play, the hours you study, even the choices you make outside the table. You start asking, is the reward worth the cost? That simple question, born from poker math, becomes a compass for everyday life. The longer you play, the more you see that the real value of pot odds isn't about winning money. It's about protecting your clarity. When you calculate calmly, you shield yourself from impulsive decisions, emotional swings, and regret. You give yourself permission to lose a hand without losing control. That's a rare kind of freedom. Every player eventually realizes that luck evens out. The cards you get today aren't what define your future. What matters is how you respond to them. Whether you chase or wait, whether you guess or calculate, whether you let emotion dictate the moment or stay anchored in logic. Pot odds are a quiet reminder that every outcome starts with a single choice to stay rational. There's a peaceful honesty in that. When you fold because the math is wrong, you're not giving up, you're protecting your future self. When you call because the price is right, you're trusting the process, not hoping for miracles. Poker rewards that mindset slowly but steadily. The more you align with truth, the more luck starts to feel like just another variable in a long equation that you already understand. Think back to your earliest games, the excitement, the confusion, the feeling of wanting to prove yourself. You've come a long way since then. You now know that poker isn't about adrenaline, it's about awareness. It's about finding calm in a room full of noise, and pot odds are one of the simplest, clearest ways to get there. They remind you that every chip is a choice, every decision a reflection of patience. When you start to think like that, you stop chasing wins and start building mastery. You don't play to feel lucky, you play to feel clear, and that clarity, that quiet confidence, is what makes the game beautiful. Even when you lose, you'll notice something shift. The disappointment fades faster. You analyze instead of regret. You learn instead of react. Because you know the numbers and you trust them. You understand that poker is a long conversation between chaos and reason. And pot odds are your way of staying calm in the middle of it. The real lesson beneath it all is simple. Peace comes from preparation. When you know the logic, emotion loses its grip. You can sit at any table, face any player, and know that your decisions are grounded. You're not hoping, you're evaluating. You're not forcing, you're allowing the math to guide you quietly and confidently. And that's the kind of mindset that carries far beyond the felt. In life, as in poker, you'll face moments that test your patience, tempt your impulses, or challenge your logic. The same principle applies. Measure the cost, measure the gain, and act with awareness. When the odds are right, you move forward. When they're not, you let go. Either way, you stay at peace. In the end, poker is a mirror. It reflects how you think, how you react, and how well you manage yourself under uncertainty. Pot odds are your lens to see that reflection clearly. They remind you that the goal isn't to win every hand, it's to make every decision well. When you learn to do that, you start winning in a different way. So as you leave the table tonight, take that calm with you. The shuffling fades, the lights dim, but the lesson stays. The math was never about numbers, it was about awareness, about staying logical when emotion rises, and patient when temptation calls. That's the quiet wisdom hidden inside pot odds. You don't need to memorize equations, you don't need to chase perfection. You only need to remember the simple truth that built this entire journey. When the price is right, stay in. When it's wrong, walk away. Everything else, skill, success, and peace of mind, grows naturally from that.